entrenched Arab regime. All right? I'm going to run it back. I'm going to read it back. I'm going to slow it down. And it's critical, y'all, because Egypt is the capital dominion
of the planet.
Of the capital empire of the dominion of Africa. See, Egypt is a capital empire. It's deep in that whole situation. It says tens of thousands of protesters clashed with police in cities across Egypt on Tuesday to demand the ouster of the president.
Oh, get him out. Out of there.
Right.
Okay, and
as shockwaves from Tunisia's successful revolt against its leader 2 weeks ago continued to rumble through the Middle East.
They done did they thing.
They
done ousted theirs.
Right.
Okay.
Got rid of them.
Yes.
Now Egypt like, oh,
hey, we about to get rid of this one.
You gotta go.
We the people.
Right.
The protests appear to be the biggest in decades.
10,000.
In decades.
In Egypt. A country where opposition has long been kept in check and demonstrations rarely draw more than a few hundred people.
Right.
According to some initial accounts, as many as 50,000 demonstrators in all turned out in Cairo, Alexandria, Suez, and other Egyptian cities.
50,000.
Exactly.
Total.
At least 2 protesters and 1 security official were killed.
Okay.
U.S. officials said they were carefully watching the outpouring of anger in Egypt, one of Washington's key allies in the Middle East and one of the top recipients of U.S. military aid. The protest marked the greatest upsurge of anger so far inspired by the Tunisian protests, which culminated this month in the fall of the North African country's longtime president. In some 10 days since then, demonstrations have broken out in Algeria, Jordan, and Yemen. For many Egyptians, the fall of Tunisia's dictator broke a psychological barrier by exposing the weakness of a seemingly entrenched Arab regime. The demonstrators' energy and numbers were evidence that Egyptians, long frustrated by mounting economic woes and a seemingly unmovable leadership, were capable of uniting to challenge the rule of President Hosni Mubarak. This is an historic day in Egypt's history because we have started to say no, said Mohammed Salah, who joined protesters Tuesday night in Cairo's Tahrir Square, the Egyptian's capital's main interchange. I'll tell my children someday that I was standing here in Tahrir Square. Top Egyptian officials weren't available to comment, but a government statement confirmed protests had taken place in several regions. Egyptians have the right to express themselves, a spokesman for Egyptian's foreign ministry said in a statement. Egypt's interior ministry said that after some 10,000 protesters gathered Tuesday in Tahrir Square, police forces took necessary measures to maintain order and protect public safety. Any major shift in the foreign policy of Egypt, the Arab's world's most populous country, would have lasting impact for American interests. Any major shift in the foreign policy of Egypt, the Arab world's most populous country, would have lasting impact for American interests in matters from the Arab-Israel peace process to the fight against Al-Qaeda, says current and former U.S. officials. A major concern, though not an immediate one, is that an Islamist government could someday take power in Cairo, drastically reordering Egypt's worldview in a manner similar to what happened in Iran when the 1979 Islamic Revolution overthrew the American-backed Shah. Tuesday's protest fell on Police Day, which commemorates a police-led uprising against British colonials in 1952. Many Egyptians have remained angry over allegations that police officers beat a young man to death last summer in Alexandria. Throughout the afternoon in Cairo, demonstrators challenged police to employ the sort of heavy-handed tactic that in the end helped undo Tunisia's autocratic regime. The Tunisian army's refusal to follow presidential orders to fire live rounds into a crowd of demonstrators is credited with turning the tide. Protesters marched Tuesday afternoon to Tahrir Square, rallying against Mr. Mubarak's three-decade rule and against his son Gamal, seen as a possible successor. They shouted for an end to Egypt's emergency law, which grants extensive powers to security services, and called for an increase in the minimum wage. Such demands bore echoes of Tunisians' rallies that culminated in President Zine al-Abidine bin Ali's unexpected January 14th flight to Saudi Arabia. "Hey Husseini, hey Gamal, Saudi Arabia is waiting for you," demonstrators chanted. They were met in Tahrir Square by an almost equal number of state security officials who used clubs, water cannons, and tear gas to subdue the crowd. Protests developed by late afternoon into riots, with stone-throwing youth forcing police to retreat several blocks. Baton-wielding officers charged back, beating demonstrators. Several protesters vowed late Tuesday to remain in the square till morning. Security forces dispersed protesters early Wednesday, the state news agency reported. For all the inspiration protesters drew from Tunisia, the demonstrations underscored differences between the two countries. Unlike in Tunisia, where the military paved the way for Mr. Ben Ali's ouster by holding fire on demonstrators, Egypt's military has an economic interest in keeping the current regime in power. Mr. Mubarak is a former Air Force general, and the government has given top officers control over some of Egypt's largest state-owned businesses. Tunisia's outpouring was relatively spontaneous. The rally in Egypt was planned and organized by a coalition of regime opponents and a pro-labor youth movement. The opposition group spent the previous week before Tuesday's so-called Day of Wrath rallying support on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter in Egypt wasn't working for several hours Tuesday. Twitter's public relations team confirmed in an online message Tuesday that the service was blocked in Egypt. Some of Egypt's largest opposition forces tried to keep a low profile. The Muslim Brotherhood, an outlawed Islamist group that is Egypt's most powerful political opposition, allowed members to participate but stopped short of calling them onto the streets. Egypt's Interior Ministry says some of the most violent rioting involved a large number of those affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. That couldn't be independently confirmed. Nobel Prize winner Mohammed El-Baradi, a pro-democracy advocate some Egyptians would like to see succeed Mr. Mubarak, said he supported the protest but didn't participate. Egypt poses a complex challenge for U.S. foreign policy, and the Obama administration has been navigating a delicate diplomatic line with Mr. Mubarak's government in recent months. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on Tuesday downplayed the idea that Mr. Mubarak's government was being destabilized, even as she called for his security forces to show restraint.
Right.
So you can see that, you know, America and Europe, Egypt,
It's
you know,
connected.
got a real
Alliance.
interesting connection, right? And so, as you start studying, you know, your Moorish empire, like you said, the history, it just starts to, you know, make sense to you. Just want to read this little, I know he got the Quran in here.